Hi, so I wanted to vlog my experience reading Katabasis by kuang because this is just one of my most anticipated releases of the year. So I don't know, I just wanted to talk to you about it, but I don't really have a concept to put this into. So welcome to I'm for the first time vlogging a book on its own, spoiler free, because I've done spoiler vlogs. I don't want to do a spoiler vlog for this one because I feel like if I have to discuss everything, then this is gonna be like way too long. But I'm gonna do a spoiler free vlog for just one book. I've never done that. I don't know if this is gonna be interesting. You'll tell me. Anyway, I also, but I ignore the title. That's clickbait because I've seen so many discussions on this book. First pre-release of people who are reading the arcs of like, oh, this is all the required reading you need to do before getting into katabasis. Katabasis? How do you pronounce it? I know if Quan says it doesn't matter, but still, I'm gonna pronounce it. So they had like a whole reading list. I was like, since when are we doing homework for books? Like, I know I'm not like the reading the most intelligent books out there. But since when are we doing homework for books? Are you kidding me? And I can't understand if you're like reading a retelling or something to also read the original text before going into the retelling. That's something I can understand. But like doing full like reading list of books you need to read before this book, that seemed a bit insane to me. And then this book came out and people started reading it, and then people started just saying this is like a textbook and that it's like way too like not too intelligent but like too verbose, I guess, and like it's not necessary. And then people were like, no, actually this is just what dark academia is like, you're just stupid, which is a bit harsh. But also no one said it in those words, but like kind of. And now I just want to know, am I too stupid for katabasis? Because like I said, intelligent reads not definitely my thing. So arc 1 is a little bit on my comfort zone in that sense, but I adored Babel. Like I said, arc 1 says it doesn't matter. But yeah, and I generally don't think I am too stupid for this book, but I thought it would be a fun clickbaity title, so that's what I'm doing. And also that, you know, gives me a reason why I can make a vlog on this book on its own. So there we go. All I want to do is just read this book, so I'm gonna do that. I am hoping to enjoy this. I have heard some kind of like mixed reviews again. Mainly a lot of people would just say that this is not a thing, and then people being like, yeah, but did you like Babel? And they were like, no, it was like you're just reading things based on hype, not because you actually thought you were gonna enjoy it. And that's been a big discussion around it. So I'm discounting those negative reviews, but even from people who also really enjoy Quan's books, I've seen no one blatantly dislike this book, but definitely like some mixed opinions on whether this is like mid or good, you know. So I'm very curious to see what I think of it myself. And yeah, I'll give you a synopsis. I'm just gonna read the back. Grad student Alice Law has only ever had one goal: to become the brightest mind in the field of analytic magic. But the only person who can make her dream come true is dead and inconveniently in hell. And Alice, along with her biggest rival Peter Murdoch, is going after him. But hell is not as the philosopher. I can't pronounce philosopher, so I am gonna be too dumb for this book. That's it. I can't even say philosophers. I'm truly fucked. Anyway, but hell is not as the philosophers claim. Its rules are upside down, and if she's going to get out of their life, she and Peter will have to work together. That's if they can agree on anything. Will they triumph or kill each other trying? So yeah, even though I have heard some mixed things about it, hearing Guan talk about this book, because I've seen a lot of clips online of her, like kind of like those like not like author signings, I guess. I don't know, but like where she like is in a bookstore talking to another author about the book, and just hearing her talk about this book just makes me think I'm gonna be obsessed with this. So I'm very excited to read this. So I'm gonna check in with you once I've read a little bit, give you my thoughts on it, and then I'm gonna read some more, and you know how reading vlogs go, so see you later. Hi, so it's been a little bit since I last talked to you. I apologize, but I've had a bit of a reading slump, and it's not the fault of this book, like generally not at all, just been life. Life's been kicking me in the butt, but I am 100 pages into katabasis. I still haven't like locked down on what pronunciation I'm going with, but I'm 100 pages in, as I said, and I honestly think I left things off at an interesting point to talk about this book, but I was going to talk to you 100 pages into this book. I'm really loving this, and I, at this point in time, don't get a lot of the complaints that come with this, because I don't think this reads boring. I don't think this reads like a textbook. I think this generally is just such a fun time. Like, we jumped into the action almost immediately, which I was not expecting. Like, we are in hell in chapter 1. That's how quickly we go. And honestly, I feel like we're moving so quickly. And like, to be fair, I'm 100 pages in. This is like 550 pages, I believe. Okay, 541. So there is still quite a lot to go. So things can still very much change. But at this point, I just feel like we're so quick moving to the plot that to the plot, but like constantly things are happening, even if they're like not big splashy things, but we are moving, you know, we are constantly moving, if that makes sense. So in that sense, I really don't get to complain on how this is boring, but also I am having such a blast with this. Like, I have laughed out loud more than once. So how does this read like a textbook? I've never laughed at a textbook, I can tell you that. I've cried at a textbook, not laugh. And this generally made me laugh. I really like Alice's and Peter's dynamic. Their back and forth is just so hilarious, and I love it. So there we go. But besides that, I'm gonna give you a bit more of a synopsis because I feel like the one on the back is a bit, you know, not that in depth. But basically we follow Alice, we read from her perspective, and a little while ago her professor passed away in a tragic lab accident, and he is like one of the greatest magicians that's going around. So the fact that he has passed away is detrimental because in this kind of like time situation that we're in, it's just really difficult for people to get a job as a magician. So like, you know, find a place within that universe. So Alice was a grad student, has been doing research on how to enter hell for these past couple of months to be able to retrieve him back, so he can still, you know, give, like, you know, he can still support her with a further career, because you do need the weight of someone that, like, well respected, I guess, to be able to be sure of your future within this career path, basically. And right before she basically casts the spell that will bring her into hell, this other grad student named Peter is like, hey, I know what you've been doing, I've been doing the same, let's go to hell together. And they enter hell together and are now making their way to the place to be able to retrieve this professor. And honestly, I don't know, I'm just having a good time with this. And like I said before, I really like Alice and Peter's dynamic. From the way we kind of talk about things in this, it is very clear that they used to be really, really close. Like back when they first both got to Cambridge, it appears that they were like really close and like really close friends. But then something happened and we don't know exactly what and when, and now they don't really get along. On top of that, Peter is kind of like the golden boy of the school, I guess. I don't know that many academia words, I apologize if I misrepresent him, but you know, he's kind of like a bit of a golden boy. Everything that he wants to get done gets done, and he's always in like high praises, and he seems like he has to do everything effortless, and Alice always has to work like super hard to get these same opportunities, basically. Well, it seems like they just fall into his lap, and she is bitter about that, and I think that's interesting, and that obviously also plays part of the dynamic. But it is also obvious that, you know, something happened between them, and that's also why they like don't get along, I guess, because I feel like Peter is kind of not as against Alice as Alice is against Peter. Like, you know, there's been a rift between them. They aren't as close as they used to be, and I'm very curious to learn what that is going to be. And yeah, like I said, I really like the dynamic. I just think it is clear from the way they talk to each other that they know each other, you know what I mean? It shows that there is a shared history, but there's also like a bit of an awkwardness between them as they have not been close in a while. And I don't know, I feel like especially Peter is a bit oblivious sometimes to how much Alice dislikes him, which I think is part of like why I said that Alice dislikes Peter more than Peter dislikes Alice. And I feel like Peter just kind of, from the way I see it, because obviously it's written in Alice's POV, but from the way I interpret things, the way things go down, it very much just seems like Peter just sees this as like, oh, we grew apart, while Alice feels warmed, if that makes sense. And so there is a bit of like that hostility, but which he is not realizing, that creates for like some funny moments between them. And I am very excited to see how their relationship will develop throughout this book. As you know, I'm presuming that they're gonna have to confront their issues with each other, because how else are they gonna make it through this, you know, together, considering I feel like it's gonna be something where they're gonna have to work together quite a bit. And then besides that, I also just think that the whole setting in hell is actually quite interesting, how that is executed. They have to make their ways through all the different sins, basically, which are compartments within hell, and we have just like basically exited the first compartment, which is why I'm saying this is actually moving at a good pace, I feel like, and at a faster pace than I was imagining, considering how many people I've seen talk about how this was just so boring. I feel like things are moving like relatively quickly, if that makes sense. Like not too quickly. It's not super fast paced, but it is reading away very easily, and the plot is constantly moving. That's what I'm saying. And the way that hell is structured, I think, is very interesting because it is a bit like floaty, not entirely, like it's not solid. And I think that's very interesting. I feel like that's my favorite representation of hell. I feel like I've seen this in some other pieces of media where hell is just like never really fully realized. It's never the same, and it kind of like the afterlife just in general, I like it when it's kind of like not represented as like super structured and like it can always change. And then this book definitely established that the reasons why there are so many different accounts of hell throughout history is because it does adapt to the people in it. For them, it very much takes on the structure of academia, which I think is really interesting because that also gives the opportunity, of course, to give commentary on academia, which is definitely doing with the musicians. I think it's very interesting because their whole structure lives within academia. It is mentioned at a certain point that there are like witches outside of academia that are basically doing the exact same thing but then without academic support, but they are seen as less than. And even though like Alice can generally mention like sometimes they report like very interesting things, but it never gets like built upon by like, you know, the people in academia, like by the magicians, because it doesn't come from a reputable source, and it's like they're not seen as serious, while the magicians themselves is kind of like a prestigious title a little bit. Like there we have gotten the discussion of to go into hell they have to give up a serious price, which is half of their lives, and both Peter and Alice do that without hesitation, because if they had to choose between living like a full lengthy life or like in which they're not a magicians, or a life that is short but in which they are musicians, they are very easily like, hello, second choice, easy. Which I feel like that shows kind of like the prestige that comes with the title, I guess. And so we have that, and there's a lot of like commentary around just how much people would give up to become a magician, even besides Peter and Alice, which I won't go in depth about because I do want to keep this spoiler free. But at the same time, Alice also mentions that the reason why there's so little jobs within the magician's world and like within this academia is because it is regularly losing funds all over the world. Like things are focusing much more on technology rather than magic, because the magic isn't as graspable, is that a word? Like it's not solid, if that makes sense. Like it very much lives in a state in between what's real and what's not, and therefore even though it is like a very prestigious thing, it also is constantly losing funds. For example, that she talks about like technological advances like computers and stuff like that, that's gaining more funds as that's something that's sellable, let's say, while for magic that isn't the case. And therefore like a lot of academic institutions are losing funding for the musician side, and therefore jobs within that field are dwindling, because you know, if they can pay a lot of people of course they're not gonna hire a lot of people. So I think that juxtaposition is also very interesting, also something we see in real life a lot, where I feel like a lot of fields are respected but underfunded, and you know, not taken as seriously in a way when it comes to not being profitable. So I think, you know, profit is sometimes more important than whatever else, and I think those discussions are also really interesting. Again, the juxtaposition with this obviously being like a super prestigious, everyone wants to retain this kind of thing, and then also kind of being like, oh yeah, but like in the grander scheme of things nobody actually cares because we're gonna defund it like pretty regularly. I think that's really interesting as well. And yeah, I do have to say, it's something I've seen a lot of discussions about this, is that the philosophy stuff is sometimes a bit much, and I get that but I love it. I think it's so interesting, and I feel like the way it's incorporated makes sense, because like I said, the magic in this world kind of exists in what's not tangible, if that makes sense. I can't fully explain it. I feel like Kwan does a way better job at it than I ever could, which makes sense because it is her book, but it lives in that intangible realm, so it makes sense that it is very focused on philosophy and different ways that humanity just has looked at life, even when it comes to like even being in hell. Like obviously a lot of discussions around how does hell look like, how do you like navigate it, comes from also a lot of like not just philosophy I can talk from a lot of like philosophical places, but also from a lot of religious places, and how that has changed throughout history, and how are you sure how it looks like now. I think it's very interesting, and therefore I feel like all of the like little philosophy rents going in on this place is relevant. Like, it's very important to understand what is going on with the magic and, you know, hell just in general. I think it's very interesting, but also I just think philosophy in general is very interesting. I don't know much about it, but always I did take one philosophy class. Like, I don't remember like all of the names of like the different stretches and what belongs to what exactly, but like I remember in those classes I always thought it was so interesting to think about things from different perspectives. Even sometimes in the same lesson you'd be talking about like one philosopher and then like a little later about another, and there's like such opposing views on like the same thing and how they're both like, because it just, you know, it's about and it's about, I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent myself, but I do think philosophy is like a very interesting subject, so that's also probably part of why I am really enjoying those like little side tangents. But I also think at this point in time they are small enough, they are relevant enough that even if I wasn't as interested in it, I wouldn't be bothered by it. I feel like in Babel Babel, it's also sometimes goes on side tangents, but about language, and again, it's something I think is very interesting, and how language evolves and talking about translations and stuff like that. I think all that shit is really interesting, so I was very interested. But I did have some times where there were side tangents where like, okay, what's the point? I haven't had that with this book yet. I feel like all of the side tangents so far, I'm like, okay, this makes sense in explaining how this world works basically better. So I don't know, I'm having such a good time with this. And like I said, it is also reading relatively quickly. Like I was like, obviously this is going slower than like, for example, like a contemporary romance. I read that much quicker. But considering what I'd heard about this book, even from people who loved it, I was thinking this was gonna be like more dense than it is. And again, I'm only 100 pages in, so things could change on me, but I feel like I've gotten a lot of information in my head already about how different aspects of this work. And I so far have never felt like a moment where it was dense. And again, I'm in a bit of a slump, and I'm actually like making good progress on this book, and I'm really having much difficulty reading this. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just the smartest person in the world. Don't take that seriously. I generally am not. But yeah, I don't know. I'm really liking this so far. But again, 100 pages in, a lot can change. There's like 400 left. So, you know. Hi, so 100 pages for on page 200. And honestly, I won't be going in depth anymore as much, because I do think there was a lot of things I want to talk about that are just like straight up spoilers. So obviously I won't be doing that, although I hate the fact now that I decided to make the spoiler free, because I have thoughts. But I'm still having such a good time with this book, and it's reading, like I'm getting in such a groove with reading it as well, and it's flowing by, and I don't know, I'm loving it. That's all you gotta know about like my like pure thoughts on it, I guess. But two things I did want to discuss, and things that also already were brought up in the first 100 pages, but we delved a bit more into in these 100 pages, and I forgot to talk to you about it. But one thing that I think is really interesting is both Peter and Alice's perception of this professor that they're going to rescue, I guess. And it's interesting because this professor is, besides being known as one of like the greatest in what he does, he's also kind of known as an asshole. And Alice mentions many times that when she originally, you know, was talking to people about going to study under him, a lot of people were like, oh, that guy, you sure about that? And even afterwards, like whenever she comes across different people and she mentions like, oh yeah, I'm studying under him, everyone is like, that guy. So like he has like very much a reputation of being just like a massive asshole, and we have seen him act like a massive asshole in some of these moments as well. That's when we of course flash back to when he was still alive, because you know, I think their relationship with him is very interesting, because obviously they are trying to get him back, but I think most of the other people are like glad to be rid of him because he was just such an ass. But I also think it's so interesting to kind of see the way he's talked about, because even though he is generally known as an asshole, he also again is generally known as the greatest of all time, or like at least in this moment. And it's interesting to see how if you're a genius, like bad behavior just gets accepted and you just get to continue on being an asshole and breaking the rules, you know, because just your mind is more important than your behavior, if that makes sense. And then also at the same time, Alice and Peter have this conversation about them at a certain point, and they mention that they feel lucky to have been treated like shit by him, basically, because it shows like an investment in them by him, I guess, and it shows that they are superior in that sense. And I also think that attitude is so interesting to construct, and I feel like so many cases of abuse of power is definitely present in academia, so I really also like the way that's tackled in this book. And so it's also like Alice especially refuses to see herself as a victim. She's like she doesn't understand the language around it, because she's like, that makes it sound like we are children and we have no say in what's happening, and like abuse of power in those terms. Like we are adults, we're very smart people. Like that's discounting our own kind of responsibility within these moments. But also I feel like that's a very naive way to look at things, especially, you know, considering she has, because we see more of Alice's thoughts on this because of course we are in her perspective. But I do think there is something to be said about her being so determined about academia, like her whole life. Like even before she fully knew she was gonna be a magician, she still had her like eyes set on like life at academia. Of course, once she discovered like magic properly and that's a viable career option for her, she like fully dedicated herself to that. And I think it's so interesting to see like how she's indoctrinated herself in a way to have certain beliefs. Like there's a lot of misogyny within academia, of course, that's been known, but especially again in the magicians, like they're like very early on it is mentioned that it is generally accepted that men are better magicians because it's like something in the cadence of their voice and the gravitas of their voice makes saying spells more powerful. And it's like mostly pseudoscience, yet everyone believes it. Like there's no actual reason behind it. And she calls that out as misogyny, rightfully so. And there's a lot of times where she calls out misogyny just in the way that she's viewed compared to her peers. But at the same time, she also has a lot of internalized misogyny. And that makes sense because she has dedicated herself so much to this cause, I guess. And it, considering it is so misogynistic, it makes sense that she internalized so much without realizing it. And I feel like there's a lot to be said in the same way, kind of like the abuse they face from this professor and kind of idolizing it in a sense comes very much from a similar place where it just, you're dedicated so much to this path and you think this is the only way to do it, so that you kind of like indoctrinate yourself to accept it as normal when it isn't, and like accept your own responsibility. Because even though again at moments she does recognize certain things she missed out on, or like, you know, people in her field undermine her, she does recognize that as misogyny sometimes, but also sometimes she's like, I should just work harder, like I didn't work hard enough, or like she sometimes also tries to rationalize it away. And I think that's very much, you know, a consequence. And especially when it comes to, there's very few other female students in the magician world, so I feel like especially when we see interactions with other women, I feel like it comes out the most. I feel like when it comes to herself, she can oftentimes recognize it a bit better, but sometimes when we see her interact with other women, she kind of ends up perpetuating the same misogynistic ideas that are stopping her, if that makes sense. So it's interesting to see how internalized that has become to her. And that's also a complaint I've seen so much about this book, is just that a lot of people just like couldn't stand Alice because of her internalized misogyny, but I also feel like it's contextualized, like it makes sense. And I don't know, I think what is being done around that also I think is interesting, because it is tied in with also with the power abuse of the professor, because even though he definitely has abuses power with both Peter and Alice, there's very clearly a difference between how he treats them, and he very clearly subjugates Alice to more abuse in that sense. So it plays into that as well, and I think that's really interesting. And also a thing I think is interesting is that technically Peter is a nepo baby. Like his parents also very famous scholars, not necessarily magicians, but very famous scholars and very well regarded scholars. And I feel like Alice perpetuates a lot of their differences to the fact that he's a nepo baby, and which of course definitely plays into things, but like I feel like she's oftentimes negating her own gender in this thing and the misogyny of the world in this thing. So I don't know, I think all of that's very interesting, and I feel like I'm talking in circles, but I just think everything this book is doing is so interesting, and I'm so intrigued by it, and still the plot keeps moving. And we are going through different phases of hell, which are based on the different sins. And again, I think it's all interesting to see the sins not personified, because they're not people, but locationized, I guess, and see that how it's brought to life in a sense. And I feel like this is something that's happening a lot. I feel like this Seven Deadly Sins is a theme that is recurring in quite a lot of books recently. And I always think it's so interesting how different authors kind of view different sins and how they personify it. And I love kind of seeing Kuang's approach to that, and also seeing our characters' reactions to that. I feel like especially we have done Pride and Lust, and especially the Lust, like Alice's reaction to that was very visceral, and that was very interesting. So yeah, I don't know, I think this is so interesting. I don't know what anyone's talking about because I'm having a time in my life. So I'm gonna continue reading, and I told you I was not going to go very much in depth, but I've talked for shit long amount of time, so I apologize. But I do think in the future I might do every 100 pages. I will see how much I have to say, because like I said, it is getting more difficult to talk about this book without any spoilers. Okay, so it's later this evening. I'm 400 pages into this book, and I'm determined to finish it today. I don't know, it's not letting me go at all. Like, I don't know. I, at this point, don't think it's gonna be a 5-star, just because I think there are a couple of things that feel a bit underdeveloped, but it's definitely a very high 4 so far. And it's so compelling. Like, I genuinely don't get the boring complaints. Like, I get reading is subjective and everyone sees different things in it, but this has just been moving at a consistent pace. Like, the plot has been progressing at a consistent pace. Also, I don't think there's a lot of side tensions going on in this book, which was a thing in Babel. Like I said, I love that book. That is a 5-star book. And ultimately, all of the side tensions are relevant, you know? But while you're reading it, sometimes you're just like, okay, what are we talking about? And I don't have that feeling in this book at all. Like, everything just feels like we're revealing the right information for this moment. And it feels very tightly crafted in that sense. And I don't know, I'm really, I know I shouldn't be reading this trying to understand other people's reviews of it, but I just have such a hard time kind of imagining this is the same book we're talking about. And again, it's not like I'm still like obsessed in love with this book. I think it's a 4-star, definitely has some issues, but I don't know, I feel like the most common complaints and critiques I've seen of this, I'm like, where? Like, genuinely, I'm trying to understand and I can't. So anyway, but like, I don't know, maybe if you have not read Babel, I can understand that this is boring, but like, if you used to Babel, I mean, you like that and didn't think that was info dumpy and like went on a lot of side tangents that seemed irrelevant, but you do think this does that? I'm so confused, genuinely. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. That's not what I wanted to talk to you about. But again, there wasn't like much to talk about because I can't spoil anything, but things have moved, let's say it that way. We've definitely made some changes as we've encountered stuff that, I don't have to talk about this, but there is something we encounter, like someone, I guess, and it does pull like the whole dynamic of academia into question, because that's a person who went through it and is against it and has very different views upon it now than our two main characters do. And when they're in conversation, you can see that, you know, they don't understand what's going on, but then afterwards you can kind of see how that change in perspective, I guess, is influencing them. And then we also get more of a breakdown of things that happened. We also got a chapter from Peter's POV, I would say, but more so kind of like explaining his past as well. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm really glad we got that. And overall, I don't know, I like how this is showing how complicated abuse is sometimes, especially in an industry like the academia. Like, there is generally like a certain point where they're discussing kind of like the abuse they faced from their professor, and then they generally just say, but like, it wasn't actual abuse, because like there's professor would generally like hurl things at students or like are constantly like yelling at them, and he never did that. And it's like, yeah, but he still broke down who you were as a person. But when it comes to A Journey Through Hell, it's taking honestly a bit of a backseat, as it's more so breaking down the relationship between these two characters and with their professor. I think that's been the main focus of like the last little chunk I've been reading, but now where I am, things are starting to pick up again and shit is happening in hell again. But we did also learn some other stuff going on. Again, it's hard to talk about without spoiling anything. But yeah, I do think that when it comes to discussions around abuse of power, mainly, I think this is such a strong book, and it's so well written in that sense. And I feel like that's its main purpose, you know, kind of like Babel was about like a whole bunch of shit, but like its main takeaway was colonialism and racism and critiquing that, and how that's like integral, like no, that's not the right word, how that has become such an integral part of like regular life or like academia in Babel, and it shouldn't be accepted that way. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, that's the main thesis of Babel, you know, colonialism and racism. And I feel like for katabasis, it's the abuse of power and misogyny, and I think all of that is so incredibly well executed that, you know, I I can't fault this book for any of that. But I also think the journey to hell is interesting. I think the magic system is interesting. I'm still very intrigued by it. I think the book is very compelling. I think the characters are very interesting. The only thing that I kind of feel like I have a complaint about is that I do think the relationship between Peter and Alice at this point is just a bit undeveloped. And I know it's gonna turn into a romance because I've heard our Kuang talk about it. And it's just the direction things are going, I feel like even friendship wise, it feels very undeveloped. I feel like the two of them were very stagnant throughout a lot of the book, and then all of a sudden they both had like these big revelations, which did make sense for them to like have this moment of opening up because it's just a mental block they needed to get through to be able to continue on the journey. But then all of a sudden right after that they're like, oh, we're besties now, and that felt a bit disingenuous, and I wanted a bit more development there, especially to have more of an impact on other stuff that happens, especially because other stuff that happens after that a little bit. Again, I'm trying not to spoil it. Kind of that all of a sudden like, oh, we're tight now without any like real development there. I think is gonna be the downfall for me with this book, where it's not like a full 5-star, absolutely love it. Like I said, I don't think it's gonna go lower than a 4, depending on how these last 150 pages are gonna go. It might go back up to a 5, I don't know, but I highly doubt I will see it move down. But I do think a little bit more could have done there, just for everything to hit its intended emotional impact, if that makes sense. So yeah, but I don't know, like I said, stuff. I said 150, I actually have 140 pages left to go, so I'm gonna go read that, and then I'll give you my final thoughts on this book. Okay, so hi, how are you doing? It is the next day, and I finished Katabasis by kuang, katabasis. I still don't know what pronunciation I'm settling. I apologize, but I didn't want to finish this one last night because I got too tired, so I went to bed with like 50 pages or so left, and then I finished that up first thing this morning, and it's a 5-star. It is just barely. Like, I debated for quite some time if it's like a high 4 or just a 5, and I do think it is a 5, because ultimately the complaint I have with Peter and Alice's relationship being a bit underdeveloped for my taste, ultimately that's such a small part of this book that even though yes, it makes some parts fall flat, it isn't that big to actually make the book fall flat, in my opinion. Especially because I do think the ending is just so strong, especially when it comes to like Alice's like personal journey. In that sense, it is just so incredibly well done and so satisfying as well. It just, I don't know, it just chef's kiss perfect. And I really just closed this book with just like a smile on my face, because I just love the way it's wrapped up. So it is a 5. I need to say that I did like this a bit less than Babel, which is my other 5-star from this author, but still highly recommend. But yeah, I generally don't think I'm too dumb for katabasis, except that I still don't know how to settle on the pronunciation. That's my only issue with this book. But I don't know, I feel like it's so weird seeing so many people who also love Babel think this is like so dense and slow, when I didn't have that thing with this book at all. Did have those issues a couple of times with Babel, but like I said, I do prefer that book because ultimately I really love what that does. But I feel like Babel has a very slow start, and it always, like, for me, it kind of didn't know how I felt about it until like the latter half of the book, maybe a little bit further even, when it got like really good, if that makes sense. I vlogged my experience reading Babel as well, so you can go see that. But this, I feel like, was just very engaging the entire way through, and I didn't think at any point that it was dense. I feel like the like what other people might call side tangents were always very, like, they didn't actually feel like side tangents. They felt like very relevant to what was going on in the plot at the time. And yeah, I don't know, I don't get the whole thing with it. And of course there's a lot of reasons to dislike this book that are perfectly valid. I'm not saying that I don't get why anyone would dislike it, but like just the whole perspective of this being like super tense, textbooky, and like very boring to read, I don't get. Because to me, especially if you're used to Babel, because I'm sure like if this is the first F Kuang you read, or you're comparing it to Yellowface, I feel like yes, this is gonna be dense. But like compared to even the Poppy War, I think the Poppy War is more dense than this, just because the Poppy War is like a whole world that you gotta get, gotta wrap your head around, while this is just a layer of magic over our own world. So it is different. So I would say, like, from her fantasy books, I feel like this to me is the least dense one. So I feel like it's interesting to see so many people pretend like this is the most dense that she's written. And again, that's also maybe different opinions on things, but I don't know, I thought it was a very engaging read. I feel like the story kept moving. I really like the discussions that this book is having, and especially based on like power dynamics and sexism within academia. I think it does that really well. And overall, I don't know, I think it's clear from all my updates that I fucking love this book. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on katabasis. I'm really glad I decided to vlog this though, because at first I was a bit scared that keeping it spoiler free I wouldn't have like a entertaining vlog, but I do feel like I had a lot to say about this even without spoiling, so I'm glad I decided to do that. So there we go. Let me know your thoughts on this book in the comments. I would love to discuss, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.